The Wind River Range in late autumn of 1832 did not merely grow cold. It tightened, hardened, and sharpened into a world that tested the bone of anyone bold or foolish enough to remain in its shadow. Snow blew off the high granite ridges in long, ragged banners, drifting down into the timberline basins where the elk trails froze solid by nightfall. Lodgepole pines groaned under their first true burden of winter, and the wind that swept across the saddles carried a sound like distant singing, thin, uneasy, and cold enough to slick the inside of a man's throat with ice. Most trappers had already moved downslope toward the Green River, or farther west toward wintering grounds along the Snake. Those who lingered near the high canyons did so only to check a final line of traps or to search for the hides they swore were waiting beneath the snowdrifts. Men talked to keep warm in such places, and talk grew strange when firelight danced on the stones and the dark pressed close. It was on those frozen nights that the same name always returned to them, spoken quietly, almost reluctantly. The woman in Cougar country. Some said she lived in a stone cabin wedged into the cliffs south of the Green River. Others insisted she slept in the open, sharing her fire with a pair of cougars that guarded her like sentinels. To greenhorns, it was simply a story meant to chill the imagination. But to seasoned mountain men, hard-bitten fellows who had seen arrows whistle past their ears and rivers rise hungry enough to swallow horses, her tale drew a different tone, half dismissed, half feared. Men of the high country did not fear ghosts, but they feared mysteries they could not track. Her name, when anyone dared use it, was Mira Callahan. Irish-born, raised on a Pennsylvania frontier farm that vanished the moment her father signed on with an Ohio trapping brigade. She grew up in the shadow of men who lived and died by pelts and rifles, men who moved through the wilderness with a hunter's gait and slept with their backs to spruce logs. When Mira was 12, she could skin a beaver faster than most grown trappers. When she was 15, she could patch a flintlock with nothing but a sliver of flint and her father's penknife. But it was her mother's knowledge that shaped her most deeply. Herbs, poultices, roots, teas that cured fevers or soothed lung burn after long nights of cold intake. Mira carried those lessons west when her parents followed the fur trade into the Rockies. Wolves took her father the first winter. Her mother lasted 2 more. By 18, Mira had no family but the land, and the land kept its own stern company. By 25, she vanished from the usual circuits of trappers and trading posts, not entirely, just enough to blur the edges of her existence. Those who saw her during the summers swore she lived alone in a narrow gorge the Shoshone called the place where cats watch from stone. Long before white trappers arrived, the canyon carried a reputation. Its ledges were pitted with caves where cougars denned in the cold seasons, and the walls held ancient petroglyphs of wide-eyed cats etched by hands long buried. It was no place for a woman alone. Yet Mira thrived there. Settlers near the Green River swore she walked with a cougar, once stroking its neck as though it were nothing more than an oversized barn cat. Others insisted they saw her move through boulder fields barefoot in snow, leaving no tracks. A party of mountain men returning from the Yellowstone country claimed they glimpsed her above a cliff edge at dawn, hair whipping in the wind, holding something shaped like a map in her hand. A ghost? A woman? Something between? The frontier cared little for distinctions. It only cared for stories, and for the people who lived long enough to become them. One evening that autumn, a crow trader named Pakuo walked into a trapper camp along the Green River, shaking snow from his buffalo robe. He had traveled from the Yellowstone country, trading tanned hides and dried choke cherries for percussion caps and flints. The men there, half-starved from early storms, were eager for any news to distract them. Pakuo sat by the fire, staring into the flames with the flat, unreadable expression of someone deciding how much truth to reveal. At length he spoke. He had seen the woman they whispered about. Not merely seen, spoken with her. The camp fell silent. Even the wind seemed to ease. Pakuo drew a piece of charcoal from the fire pit and traced something on a flat river stone. Symbols, rough lines. A jagged bend, a circle split into quarters. "She carries this," he said in halting English. "Old buckskin, very old, red paint, marked by people who came before my grandfather's grandfather." The trappers stared, baffled. Pacuo went on. He said the map Mira guarded came from a 17th century Spanish entrada, one that traveled far north of Santa Fe, farther than Spanish horses were meant to go. Some men died, some returned, and some carried tales of mountains rich with silver and stone that glittered under moonlight. It was nonsense, the trappers insisted. Campfire wind. Spanish gold talk had swirled around the fur trade since before the Ashley men built the first keelboats. Jedediah Smith himself had recorded hearing such stories from the Crow in his journals, but he treated them as he treated most myths, with polite curiosity and careful distance. Charles Larpenteur wrote of similar rumors among the Missouri trappers, talk of lost mines and Spanish trails that vanished into box canyons. Devoto dismissed most of it as frontier embroidery. But Pacuo did not look like a man repeating a tale. He looked like a man delivering a warning. One of the younger trappers laughed. "So she carries a ghost story on a piece of buckskin?" Pacuo only nodded. "Yes, a story that may keep her alive, or kill her." South of the river, in the narrow canyon where she kept her cabin wedged between two leaning pines, Mira Callahan stirred a kettle of spruce needle broth as the snow thickened beyond her doorway. Night crept into the gorge early, as it always did, walling her in with shadows. She listened to the storm gather across the ridges, and to something else beneath it, a sound no wind could make. A sound she had heard since childhood, a cougar's scream, long, rising, tearing the cold air in two. Another answered from the opposite wall of the canyon. Then silence, deep and waiting. Mira set down her ladle. Her hand drifted to the folded piece of ancient buckskin resting on the table, its red ochre symbols glowing faintly in firelight. She touched the mark she had traced 100 times before, a place where two shadows crossed at dawn on a mountainside no trapper had yet named. If her reading was right, she was close, closer than ever before. She rose before the storm fully swallowed the night. At dawn, she would leave the cabin. The map was calling the last of its secrets, and she intended to follow. The storm that buried Mira Callahan's cabin in a fresh mantle of white passed sometime after midnight, leaving the world scrubbed clean and brittle. At dawn, the sky burned a hard, icy blue. The canyon walls glittered with hoarfrost, each pine needle holding a bead of frozen light. It was the kind of morning that reminded anyone who lived beyond the frontier line that survival depended on motion, on never letting the cold catch up. Mira stepped into that new-made silence with her pack slung across her back, a buffalo robe tied at her waist, and the folded buckskin map tucked inside her coat. Her snowshoes crunched against the crust as she left the cabin behind. It would fill with snow by noon, vanish into the rock shadows by evening. She did not look back. Her path led up the frozen creek that wound through the gorge. Cougar tracks dotted the banks in long, deliberate arcs, fresh from the night before. She paused once, kneeling to press her fingers into a wide, deep print larger than any she'd seen in years. "You watched me again," she murmured quietly. Whether the cat heard or cared, the forest gave no answer. After an hour, the canyon widened into a broken meadow ringed with aspen skeletons. Here Mira paused to study the map. The buckskin, stiffened with age, held markings in red ochre and soot, ridges, watercourses, sun symbols, shadow lines, and something that looked like a cross built from two angled strokes. That same symbol, the crossing of two shadows, had obsessed her for months. It appeared only once on the map, near what looked like a jagged double ridge. If she was right, the Spanish survivor who drew it had been marking not treasure, but positioned something Jedediah Smith had done in the margins of his own journals when sketching unknown river forks. Smith's sketches formed the backbone of her belief. She had read copies of his journals at a summer rendezvous 3 years earlier. Pages passed back and forth between whiskey tents like relics. Smith noted a distinct place in the southern Wind River Range where two rock spurs cast shadows that crossed like the blades of shears at dawn. The Shoshone had a name for that place too, though none had traveled there in decades. When Mira compared Smith's rough drawing to the ochre cross on her buckskin, the match had been unmistakable, Not exact, but close enough for the frontier, where men measured the world by water lines and mountain backs, not by surveyors' chains. She slipped the map away and continued upward, her breath fogging in the cold. By midday she reached a narrow pass where the land rose sharply toward the Wind River high country. The terrain here bore a different mood, quiet, yes, but thick with an older kind of silence, one that felt layered beneath centuries of footsteps. Spanish, Crow, Shoshone, trappers from street, Louis, wanderers from places farther yet. Mira stopped at a boulder scored with scratches. No animal had made them. The marks curved rhythmically, as if carved with deliberate human hands. She brushed snow from the stone. A faint, nearly worn-away design emerged, a sunburst with 4 rays, the same symbol painted on the buckskin. Her pulse quickened. This sign had been laid down long before her lifetime, before her father's or her grandfather's. Spanish? Possibly. Survivors of the Entrada would have marked their trail in anything available. But she had seen similar glyphs in Crow territory too, sometimes used to signal danger, sometimes water, sometimes a crossing over spiritual land. Larpenteur wrote that Crow guides often misunderstood Spanish symbols, believing them to be warnings rather than directions. That thought stirred inside her. Had she been reading the map wrong all along? Were the symbols marking a route toward something or away from it? Mira pressed her gloved fingers to the stone. A faint warmth remained where morning sun had struck it. She rose, unsure whether the tremor in her chest was excitement or caution. By late afternoon, clouds regrouped over the range. The wind sharpened, slicing through tree lines with a voice like a dull saw. Mira made camp beneath a leaning spruce, building a small fire shielded by rocks. She boiled spruce needles for tea, unwrapped dried venison, and drew the buckskin onto her lap. The map's lines seemed to shift in firelight, the ochre strokes deepening into rust-red veins. She traced the double ridge, the narrow canyon lines, and the crossed shadows. Her thoughts wandered to the Crow trader's story. He claimed the map belonged to survivors of a 1700s Spanish Entrada, perhaps the same northern ventures that historians like Devoto believed reached near the Yellowstone Basin before turning back. Jedediah Smith himself had written of old Spanish horse tracks far north of Santa Fe. Beckworth swore he once found a rusted spur near the Bighorn Mountains. Stories overlapped, blurred, tangled like river roots. Still, one fact remained unshaken. Somebody had drawn this map from memory, and they had drawn it in blood-colored ochre. The fire cracked softly. Night deepened around her. A sound drifted from beyond the tree line. Soft at first, almost a whisper, then louder. A low, rolling growl followed by a sharp, echoing scream that split the cold from ridge to ridge. A cougar, a big one. It called again, long, bearing, deliberate. Not a threat, not a warning, a presence. Mira's breath steadied. "It's close," she whispered, eyes on the dark ridges overhead. Not the cat, the place, the crossing of 2 shadows. Tomorrow she would climb. Tomorrow she would know whether the old map was truth or a myth strong enough to drag her into the heart of winter's teeth. The climb began before dawn, when the sky was still a charcoal smear above. The ridgeline and the cold had tightened every living thing into silence. Snow had crusted hard overnight, so firm Mira could cross it without sinking deeper than the width of her snowshoe bindings. The air stung with a clarity that only high-elevation winter mornings command sharp enough to make each breath feel borrowed rather than earned. She followed the frozen creek upward until it narrowed into a chute between 2 leaning granite faces. Ice hung in long, blue-green curtains from the stone. Frost ferns had grown over every fallen branch, turning the ground into a lacework of white nerves. This was country where carelessness killed quickly. Jedediah Smith had written once that winter in the Wind River Range punished both the rash and the slow equally. Mira kept Smith's caution in mind as she picked her route, testing snow depth with her pole and listening for the hollow drum that signaled a buried void beneath. Cougar tracks appeared again mid-morning, fresh, clear, and startlingly large. The prints followed the same direction she traveled, weaving in and out of the timberline. Mira crouched beside them, noting the drag of the tail, the spacing of the stride. This wasn't the young male she'd glimpsed in summer. This was an older cat, heavy, sure of its path, unhurried. "Watching me," she whispered to herself. As ever. She rose and pressed forward, though the pressure between her shoulders told her she was no longer alone in the wilderness. Some trappers feared cougars more than wolves because a wolf pack announced itself. A cougar simply existed silent, patient, invisible, until it wanted to be known. By midday she reached a shelf of wind-packed snow overlooking a narrow bowl. The bowl was strange, quiet in a way that unnerved even her. The snow lay unnaturally smooth, unbroken by any sign of movement. It took her a moment to understand why. Avalanche ground. Recent. Likely within the last 3 days. Mira's breath slowed as she studied the slope angles and the rippled crust. Her father had once told her that snow could lie to the eyes, but never to the ears. So she listened. And in the hush she heard the faint groan of settling snow, the soft compression of buried layers adjusting beneath their own weight. She circled wide around the bowl, keeping to the tree line and avoiding the open face entirely. More than one trapper had vanished beneath such slopes, their bodies never recovered, their fates recorded only as lost to winter. When she cleared the far side, she found something half buried in the drift, an old Spanish horsebone, weathered almost chalk white. The shape of it was unmistakable. A metacarpal, long and narrow, typical of the small Andalusian-type horses brought north by Spanish expeditions. Mira brushed the snow away from it, heart quickening. If the bone was truly from the entrada, it meant they had passed through this very high basin. Even more telling was the mark near the joint, a clean cut that could have been made only by a steel blade. The Crow rarely used metal tools before contact, neither did the Shoshone in this region, but Spanish soldiers carried steel knives and sabers. She held the bone a moment longer, weighing its cold weight in her gloved hand. Then she laid it back gently. The dead deserved rest, even if their stories did not. A sudden rustle snapped her attention upward. Not the wind, something heavier. The cougar emerged on the ridge above her, silent as snowfall, tawny fur blending with the winter light. Its tail swayed lazily, its golden eyes fixed on her with the steady calm of a creature who feared nothing in its domain. It was not hunting her. She felt that as surely as she felt the knife at her belt. It was accompanying her. Some Shoshone believed cougars carried the spirits of watchers' beings tied to certain places rather than people. Mira didn't know if that was true, but she did know the animal had followed her since, before dawn. She lifted a hand slowly, palm outward. The cougar blinked, turned, and vanished behind the rocks as if deciding she was permitted to continue. Mira exhaled slow, shaky, and resumed her climb. By late afternoon, the canyon walls narrowed again. Wind funneled through them in low, moaning gusts. Snow glittered in eddies so fine it resembled powdered glass. As she rounded a bend, her pole struck something hard beneath the crust. She knelt, swept snow aside, and revealed a carved symbol on a basalt boulder, a cross. Long vertical stroke, shorter horizontal, both chiseled deep, Spanish workmanship. Her pulse hammered. This was no coincidence. This was a marker. Charles Larpenteur had written of similar markings found near old Crow camps, signs left by Spanish soldiers lost or seeking direction. In Spanish frontier tradition, such a cross served many purposes: wayfinding, warning, sanctifying. Sometimes all three. Mira pressed her fingertips to the cold stone, feeling the grooves beneath the frost. Whoever carved this had done so with urgency. The depth of the line suggested repeated strokes. Desperation, perhaps. Or fear. The map symbols were aligning with the land. She was close. Close enough that excitement and dread intertwined in her gut like two ropes drawing taut. She made camp a short distance away beneath a cluster of bent pines. As night crept in, the cold deepened until even the flames of her small fire seemed brittle. She sipped spruce tea, unrolled the buckskin, and studied again the crossed shadow symbol. It was here she could feel it. Maybe a ridge ahead, maybe a hidden basin, but not far. When the wind died for a moment, the canyon offered a sound she had learned to trust. Another cougar call, long and rising across the slopes, as if reminding her that the land listened and remembered. She closed her eyes. Tomorrow she would reach the double ridge, and whatever truth the Spanish survivors tried to leave behind would finally stand revealed against the winter sky. The morning broke with a brittle clarity that felt almost ceremonial, the sky a hard-cut blade of blue above the jagged rims of the Wind River high country. Mira had barely folded her snowshoes and stowed them when she sensed she was no longer alone. It wasn't a sound, not at first, but the subtle shift of presence that the wilderness teaches only to those who've lived long within it. Then came the soft crunch of snow behind her, measured, unhurried, human. Mira turned, her hand resting on the butt of the flintlock beneath her coat. A man stood 10 paces away, a Shoshone hunter, tall, lean, wrapped in a buffalo robe stitched with quills, faded from many winters. His hair was bound in 2 braids, his face calm, eyes dark as obsidian. He carried a bow across his back and a quiver of goose-feathered arrows beside it. He raised one hand in greeting, not a threat, an introduction. "Mira Callahan," he said, his voice carrying a low, gravel-soft timbre. "I have hunted your trail since yesterday." Her grip eased from the rifle. "You've been tracking me," she replied. "Why?" He stepped closer, his breath steaming in the cold. "I am called Togo Wakai," he said. "My nephew saw your fire smoke 2 nights ago. He told me a woman walked the high country alone, a foolish woman or a brave one." Mira's mouth twitched. "Depends who you ask." Togo nodded, studying her with an unreadable expression. "You follow a map." Her pulse quickened. Not many could have known that. "How do you know?" she asked. He gestured toward the canyon behind them. "The old ones whisper of you, a woman who carries a hide drawn by men who should not have been here. Spaniards." He paused. "My grandfather told me the story. He said they came north in a time before my father's father. They were lost, sick, digging where they should not dig. Some Crow took their horses, some Shoshone watched them die. In the snow." Mira unfolded the buckskin just far enough to expose one symbol. Togo inhaled sharply. "This sign," he murmured. "Water lost place." She raised an eyebrow. "You can read it?" "Not all," he admitted. "But this one. It means the earth below is broken. Water sinks into stone instead of finding rivers. The old Spanish dug in such places. They believed silver lived there." His eyes hardened. "Silver that killed them." Mira knelt, smoothing the buckskin over her knee. "I think this symbol here," she said, pointing at the crossed shadows, "marks something else. Not where they dug, but where they saw something at dawn. A landmark." Togo crouched beside her, weighing her words in silence. "Maybe," he said finally, "or maybe it marks where they ran out of breath." She lifted her eyes. "Breath?" "Bad air," Togo replied. "My people found old pits long ago, holes in the ground where even a torch would die. The Crow found them, too. Some said the Spanish made them. Some said they were older than that." Mira felt the first coil of unease tighten inside her. Jedediah Smith had mentioned such stories, once caves with devil air, where torches sputtered for no reason. Men dismissed it as frontier superstition, but Mira had spent enough time among tribal healers to know the land carried dangers Europeans had no words for. Still, the pull of the map remained stronger than her doubt. "I need to reach the ridge where the shadows cross at dawn," she said. "Will you guide me?" Togo considered her for a long stretch of breath. "I do not chase gold," he said. "Gold makes men blind. Sick in the heart. I have seen it. I'm not chasing gold." He tilted his head. "Then what?" Mira folded the map carefully. "Truth." Something in her voice must have satisfied him, or perhaps he saw something in her eyes that matched the mountain's own hard resolve. "Either way," he nodded. "I will walk with you," he said, "but only to the place of the 2 shadows. Beyond that." He gestured to the peaks rising like frozen teeth above them. "Beyond that, the land belongs to itself. They traveled together through the afternoon. Togo moved with the effortless quiet of someone born to the mountains, each step deliberate yet fluid. He taught Mira how to listen for Chinook traps, where warm wind pockets hid beneath snow crusts, dangerous places that could swallow a horse or a hunter in an instant. She shared dried venison and strips of fry bread. He shared pine resin gum to keep the throat warm. At one point, they crossed a frozen scree field where the rocks beneath the snow shifted unpredictably. Togo showed her how to read the wind's pattern on the drifts, how small scalloped ridges indicated hidden voids beneath. "This land tries to trick you," he said. "It does not mean to, but it does." She nodded, thinking of the Spanish symbols, the crow warnings, the cougar that shadowed her, the bone carved by a steel knife. Every step forward felt like stepping deeper into a story older than she or Togo or the entrada that had vanished generations before. By dusk, they reached a small clearing sheltered by wind-shaped pines. They made camp her fire, his bow propped within reach. The air carried the deep stillness of oncoming cold. Togo broke the quiet first. "The mountain watches you," he said softly. "I saw the cat." Mira looked up sharply. "You did?" "It follows," he said. "Not hunting, just watching. This is its country." She swallowed a breath. "Maybe it wants to see what I find." Togo gazed into the fire, eyes reflecting the flames. "Or maybe it wants to see if you survive." As night thickened around them, Mira studied the buckskin again. The crossed shadows glowed amber in the firelight. Somewhere above, two ridges waited for dawn to reveal their secret. Tomorrow, she and Togo would stand beneath them, and she would know whether the map was guiding her toward history or into the same fate that swallowed the Spanish before her. Dawn rose like a blade sliding across the mountains, its first thin edge of light catching on the frosted ridges above Mira and Togo's camp. The forest around them held its breath. Even the wind paused, as if waiting to see whether the day would reveal something long hidden. Togo stood first, stamping snow from his moccasins. "Today," he said, nodding toward the high slopes, "we find the two shadows." Mira rolled the ancient buckskin carefully, tucking it deep inside her coat. The cold bit sharply at her cheeks as she followed Togo out of camp, their snowshoes leaving crisp patterns across the powder. Ahead, the terrain angled upward into a series of broken shelves, rock ledges, clusters of stunted pines, and long scree fans frozen beneath fresh snowfall. Togo moved with an almost preternatural sense of direction. Twice he stopped, studying the ridge lines, the angle of the morning light, and the faint wind that carried scents only he seemed able to read. "You feel it?" he asked once, glancing back. "Something," Mira answered. "Something old." He nodded. "Yes, old things leave weight in the air." By mid-morning, they reached a narrow saddle between two rock outcroppings. Here the morning sun rose low enough to cast long, sharp shadows across the basin below. Mira stopped, her breath catching in her throat. There they were, two long shadows stretching from opposing ridges crossing each other precisely like the symbol etched on the buckskin. Her pulse hammered. "The crossing of two shadows," she whispered. Togo grunted softly, not dismissively, but with the gravity of recognition. "This place," he said, turning slowly. "My grandfather spoke of it. A cursed canyon. A place where the Spaniards dug into the earth and the mountains answered." Mira started down toward the basin, but Togo's hand shot out, gripping her arm. "Wait." He knelt in the snow, brushing aside the surface until a dark, metallic object emerged half-buried, rusted, unmistakably shaped. A stirrup. Spanish. 17th or early 18th century by its crude, hammered construction. Mira's breath trembled. "This proves they reached here," she said. Togo shook his head. "This proves they died here." They followed the basin's curve, moving slowly, watching for unstable drifts. The shadows shifted as the sun climbed, stretching across the canyon like ink strokes. Soon they found more signs: a rusted link of chain, a buckle warped by time, a strip of leather so brittle it crumbled at Mira's touch. But the most chilling sign appeared near a boulder shaped like a crouching beast. A carving faded, but still legible. A cross, almost identical to the one she had seen the previous day, but this one surrounded by radiating lines. "Warning," Togo said quietly. "This is a danger sign. My people sometimes carve similar marks to protect others. The Spaniards, they did the same." "Protect from what?" Mira asked. Togo gestured to the basin floor. "This place swallows men." They circled to the eastern rim where the snow thinned enough for bare rock to show through. As they climbed, the wind began to carry a faint, unfamiliar scent, metallic, dry, almost bitter. Mira paused. "Smell that?" Togo inhaled, eyes narrowing. "Yes. Old air." A few steps later, they reached a narrow ledge overlooking the canyon floor. There, half hidden by a curtain of ice, was a dark opening in the rock, man-made, chiseled, shored with remnants of crude timber beams. A mine. Or what was left of one. Mira's breath quickened. "It wasn't just legend," she said softly. "They really tried to dig here." Togo said nothing, his jaw tightened. Mira crouched, running gloved fingers along the opening's edge. The marks were unmistakable pickaxe strikes, worn by time, but still clear. "It collapsed," she murmured. Togo nodded. "The earth here is wrong, hollow, bad spirits, or bad stone." They approached cautiously. Mira lit a pitch-soaked stick and held it toward the opening. The flame guttered immediately, wavering violently. She pulled back. Togo's expression grew cold. "You see?" he said. "No breath inside. The cave kills fire. It kills men faster." Mira's throat tightened. "So the entrada." "They went in," Togo said quietly, and the mountain closed around them. They climbed down to the mouth of the collapsed shaft. Snow had drifted against the fallen rocks. Bats slept inside fissures too narrow for a human to squeeze through. The mine itself was sealed beneath tons of stone, likely by the same unstable ground the mapmaker had tried to warn others about. Mira knelt, brushing ice from a nearby slab. There she found something that made her chest tighten. Scratch marks, faint but human. Dozens of them clustered near the collapsed opening. Togo crouched beside her. "Trapped men claw at stone," he said gently. "This place remembers their dying." Mira swallowed hard. The map suddenly felt heavier inside her coat. This was not treasure, not a path to riches. It was a warning drawn by survivors who had watched their companions vanish beneath the earth. The realization washed over her with a cold deeper than winter air. She understood now why the Crow trader had spoken with such gravity, why the Shoshone feared this basin, why the map carried such urgency. The buckskin was not a guide, it was a grave marker, a record of desperation, a plea to whoever might someday follow. Mira rose slowly, her gaze drifting toward the double ridge. The shadows had crossed fully now, forming an X on the basin floor. X did not mark treasure, it marked tragedy. Togo placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. "Now you know," he said quietly. "This is where the Spanish died. This is where you must decide whether to turn back." Mira breathed in the cold mountain air. Somewhere above them, a cougar called long, rising, mournful. As if echoing the same truth, the dead of the Entrada had not meant to leave a map leading anyone to this place. They meant to warn all who came after. And the warning had reached her at last. The sky darkened early above the Two-Shadow Basin, as if the mountains themselves wished to usher Mira and Togo out before nightfall could swallow anything else alive. Clouds thickened into a heavy, slate-gray ceiling. The air changed too, grew dense, metallic, humming faintly in a way Mira felt more than heard. It was a pressure that lived just behind the ribs, a quiet insistence that something in this place was wrong beneath the surface. Togo felt it as well. She saw it in the way he kept glancing toward the collapsed shaft, bow in hand, shoulders tight. "This ground is bad," he said. "The mountain speaks here, but not in a voice for the living." Mira stood at the lip of the old entrance, staring down at the tangle of rock and broken beams. The opening still breathed. She could see thin trails of cold vapor drifting outward like sighs. She lifted her pitch torch again and held it closer. The flame shuddered, pulled inward, then died with a suddenness that made her heart lurch. Not wind, not moisture, something else. Choked air, she whispered. Like the mines in the Spanish South Country, my father talked of such places, pockets of foul gas heavier than snowmelt water. Togo nodded grimly. Yes. Air that kills fire, kills men, kills anything that breathes. A chill rippled across her skin. She had studied frontier geology from bits and pieces, snippets overheard around campfires, ramblings from trappers who had prospected in the mountains of New Mexico, the occasional diagram sketched clumsily on rawhide. Collapsed caverns, rotten pockets in limestone, natural gas seepage, carbon dioxide gathering, in low chambers where nothing alive could stand long. But she had never stood atop a place that held death so close to the surface. She knelt beside the stone slab, bearing the claw marks, those white lines where men trapped beneath had tried desperately to escape. The snow had half filled them, but the shape remained, a testament left by human hands reaching for light they would never find. She closed her eyes. They thought they had found silver, she murmured, and instead they struck through into a chamber filled with bad air. When they went down again, it took them. Togo stepped closer. Now you understand why my people do not dig where the earth is thin. The mountain keeps what it chooses. She inhaled slowly, the cold stinging her throat. The survivors, she said, the ones who made the map. They must have sealed the entrance after watching their own die. Togo pointed at the mark she had mistaken for a simple cross. This sign means death. You read it like a white trapper reads a road sign. But it is a warning. A spirit mark, a plea. A plea, yes. The map had never been a promise, it had been a cry carved in ochre. Do not follow us. Turn back. This place is death. Yet she had followed. Snow began falling again, slow, heavy flakes that clung to fur, to skin, to the breath of the living. The wind carried the faintest, thinnest sound, the long, mournful cry of a cougar somewhere high among the fissured ridges. Not a hunting call, not a territorial one, a communication, almost a lament. Mira looked toward the sound. Do the cats know? She asked quietly. Togo did not smile. The animals of this country know more than we do. They know where men vanish. The cougar cry came again, closer now, echoing through the canyon walls like a question or an accusation. Mira found herself turning in a slow circle, searching the ledges, the stone overhangs, the fractured cliffs where snow clung like old scars. She finally saw it, a tawny shape perched on a rocky shelf above the collapsed shaft, tail curling lazily, eyes bright gold against the gray stormlight. The cat gazed down at them, unblinking, wholly sovereign in its domain. There was no malice in its stare, only recognition. You brought us here, Mira whispered. She didn't know why she felt compelled to say it, but the truth of the words settled deep. The cougar had shadowed her for days, not stalking, guiding. Togo bowed his head slightly toward the animal. Watch her spirit, he said under his breath. The cat lifted its head, sniffed the air, then turned and disappeared over the ridge. When the last echo faded, Mira unfolded the map once more. Snowflakes collected along the creases. The red ochre lines, once bold, looked faded, weary, like the last breath of a man dying beside a campfire. She traced the crossed shadows again. They marked this to keep others away, she said softly, but the map still traveled, across, crow hands, across traders, across mountains, until it reached me. And now? Togo asked. Mira stared at the collapsed mine, at the carved warnings, at the cold mouth of the earth that had swallowed men centuries before. Now I understand. She folded the map. This was never a path to gold. It was a message to someone who would listen. Togo set an arrow to his bowstring, scanning the shadows. What will you do with this knowledge? Mira drew in a long, cold breath. Seal it. Leave it as it is, and carry the truth to those who still tell stories of Spanish silver. Togo nodded once. A good choice. Greed kills faster than winter. As they turned to leave the basin, snow thickened into a curtain, blurring the world into white. The cougar's distant cry sounded once more fainter now, farther up the mountain, as if acknowledging her decision. Mira glanced back only once. The shadows had uncrossed. The sun had moved on. The mountain had closed its secrets for another age. She and Togo began the long walk out of Cougar country, the map pressed against her chest like a final heartbeat from men long dead. Behind them, the land settled quiet, ancient, unforgiving, and the cave exhaled one last, cold breath into the falling snow. The storm chased Mira and Togo down from the high basin with a relentlessness that felt almost personal, as if the mountain itself wanted the intruders gone. Snow thickened by the minute, blotting out the surrounding peaks until the world shrank to little more than their own breathing and the crunch of their snowshoes. The trail, once distinct, blurred into a white, shifting void. Togo moved ahead, his form half-ghosted in the storm, but never so far that Mira lost sight of him. He traveled with instinct, reading the faintest swell of wind, the subtlest lean of a tree trunk, the depth of each drift. Without him, the mountain might have reclaimed her before she made it a mile from the collapsed mine. "We reach the timberline soon," Togo called over his shoulder. "The storm will break on the lower ridges. Keep close." Mira kept the ancient map pressed beneath her coat, the buckskin warm against her heartbeat. Strange, only hours before, she had believed this folded scrap held promise. A clue, a legend. Now it felt like a final message from those whose voices had never been heard. A warning paid for in lives. The wind drove needles of snow across her face. She lowered her head, blinking against the sting, and followed the Shoshone hunter's steps into the white blur. When they finally reached thicker timber, the storm softened, caught in the branches of ancient pines that groaned under the fresh weight. They sheltered beneath a hollow formed by two wind-fallen logs. Togo shook the snow from his robe and set about building a small fire using dry bark scraped from the inside of a dead tree. Mira leaned against the log, exhaustion rushing through her in a wave so sudden her limbs trembled. "You are tired in the spirit," Togo said, not unkindly. She managed a faint, tired smile. "Is it that obvious?" "Yes," he said simply. "You walked into the mountain expecting to find gold or a story. Instead, you found a grave." Mira stared into the small fire as it took life, sparks rising through the cold air. "I understand the Spanish better now," she murmured. "They weren't greedy or foolish. They were lost and desperate, and the land punished them for it." Togo nodded. "This country is not cruel, but it is not gentle either. It takes from men what they do not respect." She ran a hand over the folded map. "They tried to warn others not to make the same mistake. And now you carry that warning," Togo replied. Mira considered his words, feeling their weight settle. She had survived where they had not because she was brave, or clever, or more skilled, but because the mountain had allowed her to leave. The cougar's cry, echoed faintly above them, carried through the timber, distant but familiar. Mira lifted her head, she still watching. Togo didn't look surprised. Watchers do not leave until their task is complete. They traveled for 2 more days, moving steadily west toward the Green River country. The storm broke, leaving the world washed clean, each ridge gleaming with untouched snow. Twice they crossed elk trails, cut deep into drifts. Once they found the fresh tracks of the cougar paralleling their path close enough to be felt but not seen. By the 3rd evening, they reached the lower foothills where winter loosened its grip just enough to reveal frozen sage flats and scattered groves of cottonwood. Smoke curled from distant camps along the river. Togo halted at the edge of a rise. "This is where our paths separate," he said. Mira took a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "You're not coming to the rendezvous?" He shook his head gently. "My people will. Winter farther east. I came to guide you to the 2 shadows. That task is done." Mira offered her hand. Togo looked at it for a long moment before placing his own against it, a rare gesture of trust between cultures. "You walk with good spirits, Mira Callahan," he said. "Tell the truth of what you found, so others do not forget the dead." "I will," she promised. Togo turned and melted into the timber with the same quiet grace he had arrived with. Within moments, he was gone, as if the forest had claimed him back. Mira stood alone, the map warm beneath her coat, the air still around her. Then she turned toward the river, toward civilization, toward the many questions waiting for her. The Green River Rendezvous was in early stir when she arrived. Trader tents, rising like worn canvases of old dreams, Crow and Shoshone families settling their lodges, French-Canadian trappers arguing over beaver prices, whiskey fires already glowing despite the hour. The smell of wood smoke, hides, spit-roasted elk, and wet wool drifted through the cold air. A group of mountain men spotted her at once. "Well, I'll be damned," one muttered. "The Cougar woman herself," another spat into the snow. "Where'd you vanish off to, Mira? Thought the cats got you." A third leaned forward, eyes gleaming. "Did you find it? The Spanish mine? The Crow trader said you had a map older'n any of us." Mira stopped, letting the murmurs ripple through the camp. All eyes were on her, curious, mocking, wary. She reached into her coat, pulled out the buckskin, unfolded it in the firelight. The ochre marks glowed faintly, like the dying embers of a long-forgotten fire. "There is no gold," she said, voice steady. "Only the graves of men who dug where the mountain did not want to be opened." Silence fell, a rare, deep silence in a place known for noise. She folded the map again. "Tell your stories if you wish," she said, "but tell them true." And with that, she walked past the stunned circle of trappers and traders, deeper into the camp, where the light of the fires glinted softly on the snow. Behind her, whispers rose. Maybe she found the treasure. No, she's hiding it. A cougar follows. Her men saw it. She came back alive. That's all that matters. And somewhere amidst it all, a legend began to settle quietly, firmly, inevitably. Not of gold, not of mines, but of a woman who walked into the mountain's forbidden places and returned carrying its truth. A truth the frontier would twist, embellish, and reshape until Mira Callahan, the woman who lived alone in Cougar country, became more myth than memory.